But honestly, all you need to know is that this place will eat you alive if you aren't careful.
Yeah, well, I was supposed to start last week, and I got a call to stay away. I wish I'd come here sooner.
Resident Evil 2 is one of the greatest remakes in video game history, but Resident Evil 2, the original, is a masterclass in despair. And a majority of that despair comes from the soundtrack. The original soundtrack in OG Resident Evil 2 is what creates that atmosphere beyond anything else in the game. Beyond any other element, it's the soundtrack. Now again, Resident Evil 2 Remake is phenomenal. It's an amazing game. Resident Evil 2 is still a masterclass of a video game. Resident Evil 1, don't get me wrong, it's perhaps, again, one of the more important games in video game history.
Wow, what a mansion!
But the remake just shines in every aspect. I can't say the same for Resident Evil 2 Remake. Really, because there is a lack of a soundtrack. For lack of a better term, it lacks a soundtrack. A thing that they did with the Resident Evil reboots, starting with Resident Evil 7, for some reason, they toned down the music. I really loved the atmosphere of Resident Evil 7. I love pretty much everything about that game except for the last third of the game when you're on the boat. I think everyone feels the exact same way. But this element of not implementing music into the games takes away from the experience of the game, in my opinion. I love the Resident Evil 7 save room theme. It's so dissonant and minimal that it works for the game that they presented. But in the other iterations of the game, whether it be Resident Evil 8, Resident Evil 2 Remake, 3 Remake, it's just like a faded sound. Even with Resident Evil 4 Remake, the music is just like remnants of the original.
Is anybody here?
The entire experience relies on not only the atmosphere that is created in-game, but also from what you hear. I know this for a fact because pretty recently I listened to just the soundtrack of Resident Evil 2, and it created a story throughout the music. The story was completely created through the music. And there are such important tracks in Resident Evil 2 that creates that atmosphere, that makes it one of the best games of all time, that takes that game to such incredible heights that I don't think they've ever done since. Now you can say what you will about like Resident Evil 2, if it's the best one in the series, if it's 4, if it's 3, if it's Code Veronica, and the atmosphere that is created with the music in Code Veronica makes it a wonderful experience. it's hit or miss for some people. I've always said that Resident Evil 2, and the way that I felt about the game, it was the best one that they made. And I think a reason behind that is because of how outstanding the music is. Resident Evil 2 Remake, it's got the best gameplay. It's perhaps one of the best remakes ever made. But the lack of music variety just, it puts an unnecessary flaw in the game. I mean, just check out some of these Resident Evil 2 original soundtrack pieces. This is what creates the horror in the game. For me, it absolutely takes it to another level. It completely puts you into that world of Raccoon City and just complete despair. That's the only word that I have for it, is despair. Without these tracks, if they went minimal with the music in this game, it would, without question, be completely swept under the rug with the Resident Evil 2 remake. And again, they slightly did this with the other games too, with Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil 4 remake. With Resident Evil 4, let's take Resident Evil 4 as an example. The music, phenomenal. I love the music. I love the save room theme. The actual save room music is perhaps one of the best pieces in video game history. For instance, when you first walk into the church and you hear that save room theme for the first time, it puts you in the shoes of the villagers, and it creates this old style ambiance that has not, in my opinion, been recreated. But overall, the soundtrack of Resident Evil 4 is kind of hit or miss. Some of the pieces are very dated. Now, there are some dated pieces in Resident Evil 2, but a majority of the soundtrack is still tied into the game's experience. It was just something interesting that I kind of thought of when thinking of like remakes and such. I replayed Resident Evil 4 remake, and it really made me think. It brought the question to my mind of why do I feel that the OG Resident Evil 2 is still better in some regards to the remake, and it's because of the music. Resident.
Hang in there.